Russia has just entered the most dangerous phase of the entire war, and the real threat from Moscow is not coming from the front lines in Ukraine. Rather, it's happening inside the rooms in Moscow where the decisions are made. The Kremlin is facing incredible pressure because for an authoritarian regime, the biggest danger isn't in making a mistake. Rather, it's not having the people necessary to tell you that you are making the mistake. And when a system does that to itself, it cuts its internal brakes. It stops correcting. It starts accelerating into the crash. And Vladimir Putin has just fired the last man with the weight to hit the brakes. Sergei Ivanov wasn't just an advisor. He was a peer of Putin's. He was a founding member of the St. Petersburg KGB circle. He knew Putin for decades before they came to power. Sergei Ivanov was one of the only people left who could speak the truth to the Russian dictator. But this month, that final check on power was removed, and this purge moved in two calculated steps. Just earlier this month, we saw Ivanov pushed out of his roles in transportation and ecology. But then on February 16th, Putin officially removed Sergei Ivanov from the Security Council. And this is the total collapse of the Kremlin's feedback loop. The Security Council is the regime's brain. It coordinates the military, spies, and all security for the state. By removing Sergei Ivanov, Vladimir Putin has turned that room into an echo chamber. Sergei Ivanov represented the pragmatic old guard, those who understood the limits of Putin and of Russia, and who could talk about it openly. But there's something else that this does as well. Without Ivanov, the balance between the rival factions has been permanently broken, and that balance was the only thing preventing the house of cards from tumbling down. Strategic decisions have become now very unpredictable, and it's become far more dangerous. With the brakes removed, there is no mechanism to stop a fatal miscalculation. The Kremlin is at full speed, with nobody left to pull Putin back as Russia heads for the abyss. My name is Dr. Jason Smart. I'm a Kiev Post special correspondent and national security advisor. And as you've noticed in the past few videos, I was not wearing a suit, which means that I did not run off and join a commune, but rather I was on work travel. So let's continue. What we see right now is sort of fascinating. We see the freefall of the Putin regime. Sergei Ivanov was a founding era pillar of the entire Putin system. And to understand the weight of this, his bond with Vladimir Putin predates Putin's marriage in 1983 to Ludmila. This predates Vladimir Putin's own children's birth. Maria, or known as Masha, was born in 1985. Katerina, who goes by Katya, was born in 1986. So he knew Ivanov for a decade before his second daughter was born. So to purge a man with this history sends a shockwave through the entire system. The elites cannot believe it. But Sergei Ivanov himself had been a significant player in the game. He had been the Minister of Defense. He had been the chief of the presidential administration. These roles sit at the junction of security and war planning. Ivanov was a pragmatic security insider who counted limits and he understood how to use resources. But removing a peer like this signals that loyalty no longer matters for Putin. This follows a pattern, though, that we saw begin last year. Nikolai Patrushev was from the same group. He was also from the St. Petersburg KGB group. But despite the fact that he had been so important, he had had senior positions, he was downgraded to overseeing government shipbuilding. Clearly a humiliation. Now, both Nikolai Patrushev and Sergei Ivanov were part of the old guard, and now we can safely say that old guard era is firmly over. But this shift puts the entire Russian state on edge. Different parts of the system are now at odds, and there's no one left to arbitrate between them. And while the world watches Ukraine, they are missing the tectonic shift inside of Moscow. Ukraine today, incredibly, is being coerced in negotiations with no one bothering to mention that it's Moscow today that's losing. And Moscow today is becoming highly destabilized. But you can help get the truth to more people. Please like this video, subscribe to this channel, share this on social media, and leave your comments below. And if you have YouTube hypes, please hype this video. Thank you. So Sergei Ivanov's removal was truly a historic shift for the Putin regime. I've studied the Putin regime for 2 decades, and this is one of the most significant moves that has happened yet, because this was not just a reshuffle. It was a public humiliation, a total banishment of one of the top figures. Sergei Ivanov being pushed out means that today other figures like Alexei Dyumin are going to be filling the vacuum. Alexei Dyumin rose through personal trust, not due to policy or due to his vision. He's a key protege of Viktor Zolotov, the one who heads the Russian National Guard, Rosgvardia. Now, to understand why the National Guard is so important, consider this. It has about 370,000 troops. According to the British, it has closer to 400,000 troops. Why that's so impressive? The National Guard's only job, realistically, is to protect Vladimir Putin, to prevent those who might rebel against him from doing so. For comparison, there's only about 600,000 Russian troops that are currently deployed in or around Ukraine. So to have perhaps 400,000 just to protect the Putin regime, that shows you where Putin's priorities are. And that shows you why people like Alexei Dyumin are given so much trust by Putin. They are in charge of his personal security. Now, Dyumin himself, of course, back last year, was put in charge of expelling the Ukrainians from Kursk, Russia. This was his moment to shine, to show that he was capable of, in fact, taking serious orders from Putin and executing them thoroughly. But also, it shows something else. What a lot of people miss in the press is who is left and what that means. So, Dyumin himself is often brought up as somebody who would next become the president of Russia. That's something that a lot of people had said Sergei Ivanov would be back in 2008. But clearly, today, he is a political ghost. But another name that comes up a lot is Dmitry Patrushev, who could become the next president of Russia. Dmitry is currently a vice prime minister. His father, of course, was pushed out, as I mentioned earlier, from one of the top slots. But the younger Patrushev still has a shot at it, though increasingly it looks like it's going to become challenging for him. But for the Russian system as a whole, what has happened just now is something that's going to be destabilizing. The Kremlin now is in a fight over a very uncertain future, and this makes the entire Russian system dangerously unstable. And if you're a channel member, we'll be digging more into these different factions and what this means in the coming days. And if you're not a channel member, you can become one today. So some criminologists believe that all of this means that these shifts are a harbinger of an impending fight over who will control Russia after Putin. But others point out this could signal that Putin is ready to take dramatic actions, perhaps attacking a NATO country or something as radical as that, just because he thinks it will somehow change how the world perceives Russia, and they put more pressure on Ukraine to give up. And that people such as Patrushev or Ivanov realize that would be a very bad idea. But Putin's no longer interested in those ideas. He's interested in the radicals who will agree with whatever he says. He's interested in those who are going to be yes men. But today, Vladimir Putin's got another problem on his hands. That today in Russia, all of this is happening at the same time that Ukraine is dismantling the war economy that pays both for the war and for loyalty and for time. Oil is the cash engine, and cash is what holds the entire Kremlin system together. Ivanov's removal happens in the same window where that cash engine is taking hits and facing bottlenecks. In the past 3 days, we've seen Ukrainian drones strike the Velikiye oil depot in the Pskov region, and that was despite their anti-drone netting. A day and a half before that, we saw Ukrainian drones strike the Tamanneftegaz oil facility in Krasnodar region. But then Russia's also got not just the Ukrainians against it, but Mother Nature. Abnormal ice formations have stalled 140 million barrels of oil in the Baltic Sea. And that's why today exports from Primorsk are down 33 to 50%. And to give you an idea of how bad that really is for Russia, oil and gas tax revenues have plunged by about 65% year on year to about $5.1 billion in January. That was about $14.5 billion just last year. But today, the clan competition in Moscow, as all of this is happening, is only getting tighter. It's only going to get more complicated as the money runs thin. And it's only going to get more complicated as Russia's ability to produce weapons continues to collapse. Increasingly inside of Ukraine, we see that missile attacks are done with missiles that were produced only a day or two before the attack. That means that Russia doesn't have a large stockpile anymore. But more than that, Ukraine is carrying out attacks on things like the Metafrax chemical plant in Perm region. That was a single source facility for the chemicals that Russia needs to make high explosives. But meanwhile, across Russia, we see attacks being carried out by ATESH, a group of Russians seeking to violently overthrow the Putin regime. And what's fascinating is that the attacks that they just carried out at the communications tower near the 260th missile arsenal, it put them into the total dark. Imagine an entire Russian unit was not able to communicate within Russia because of attacks carried out by Russians within Russia who are against the Russian regime. But more than that, there's attacks that have been carried out at places like the Cheboksary manufacturing facility that made missile and drone components. Russia today is feeling pressure across all fronts: fuel, components, communications, and aviation. Strikes are reaching deep and forcing Russia to defend every inch and all at once. But damage to parts and coordination slows operations even when the hardware can exist. The system starts to choke on its own scale. And you can make it even worse for the Russians by checking out the first pinned comment below with the question of the day, which I hope you'll answer, and the video right next to it, which you should check out to understand the situation in Russia. But right below that, you'll see how we are now collecting for donations to help the Ukrainians to win. All donations right now are being matched by a generous donor. Thank you. So, infighting between Russian security services is today leaving the country open to more attacks. We see, though, that this is part of a larger system. Why are these replacements happening? What are these shakeups really about? Now, we can see who's left, and we can easily guess that some of them have presidential ambitions. They're trying to figure out who will come after Putin. And so today they're fighting to push out those who could challenge their potential future role. But there's another side of this as well. As we discussed just yesterday, Telegram is being limited by the Russian government. But what's the reason for that? Why today is it that we see that the Russian government doesn't have Telegram? Is this because really they want to censor everybody? Or is it because they simply want to make sure that the Russian troops don't have the means to communicate to rise up against the Putin regime? Or is it another factor? Look at what is going to replace Telegram. It's called Max, which we've discussed many times. But what many people do not know about Max is that it's controlled by VKontakte. But there's something important about this. Putin's own family, it is very much so the owner of Max. Mikhail Shalomov is Putin's cousin's son. So is this really about security that everybody's forced to use Max? Or is this about steering millions of dollars into a platform that's run by the Putin family network? Today we see that this situation in Russia has become more complicated as Vladimir Putin's incredible ambition to steal as much money from his country as possible only gets more advanced. But Putin's has a lot of problems, and it's not just because money's running out. It's that their ability to produce more weapons in the future is quite literally being destroyed. But another reason that the Russians worry is look where the USS Abraham Lincoln and the USS Gerald Ford are today. They're deployed to the Middle East. Now, if the US were to carry out attacks on Iran, that matters for Russia. Iran remains a primary provider of drones and missile hardware used in Russian strikes on Ukraine. But this is why today Putin is making decisions that a lot of people inside of Russia can't really understand. If you realize that Russia is short on cash, Russia is short on the ability to produce more weapons, Russia is running out of stockpiles, why continue this war? Well, that's exactly why these changes in the Kremlin matter so much. Ivanov's fall, it really does just tie this all together because the purges, the attrition, the clampdown, the escalations are all things that Ivanov would have advised Putin to be realistic about. To do was going to be strategically best in the long term. But today, there's nobody left to tell Putin what's really going on. There is now a bubble he has created that disinforms him by his own design. Ukraine is hitting fuel, exports, and explosive factories deep inside of Russia. But who will tell Putin that today? Who will tell Putin that the war is not going so well? With fewer internal breaks, bad decisions are just going to move faster. And today, this is happening as Russia, which has had over 1,200,000 casualties since 2022, continues to try to chase down bodies anywhere it can find them. Meanwhile, recruitment to join the military is down another 6%. So all these different factors in isolation, they are certainly bad signs. But when combined, they're no longer just symbolic. They're instead ushering in the end of the Putin regime. Check out this video to see why. As always, thank you for supporting Ukraine.